If you think you're already spending too much money on Netflix and Stan and all these other subscription services, get ready. There's going to be a lot more. Later on in the year, in November, there'll be Disney, and early in November, Apple are launching their streaming service too. What is it going to have on it? Is it worth it? We have audio producer Olivia Rosenman and journalist/media mogul Seamus Byrne. They're going to launch Seamus with 9 shows. I have more fingers than Apple have shows. Is that a strange way for them to launch a streaming service in this sort of quite hectic market?
They haven't done that work like a lot of other people do, where they just go, let's just buy the rights to a bunch of stuff that other people own, and then we'll therefore say, look at all this content we have for you. They are only launching with shows that they are themselves producing. They have thrown more than $1 billion, at the idea of producing their own new shows with like massive all-star casts. They've got like epic post-apocalyptic kind of show.
Jason Momoa show is like a post-apocalyptic world where everyone is blind.
Yep.
There's also another show that sort of reimagines the space race if the Russians had got to the moon first. That one I think looks interesting.
Yeah.
And then of course there's what will be known in the rest of the world as The Morning Show, starring Reese Witherspoon and Steve Carell and Jennifer Aniston. But I believe in Australia it's going to be called Morning Wars. Okay, so, but like 9 shows though, like that,
Yeah.
There's a value proposition issue there, surely.
Right. And that's where they've come up with the clever trick of saying if you buy any of their new hardware in coming months, you will get a year's subscription for free. That way they can, I guess, out of the gate go, look, we have X million people signing up on day one, which is literally because they gave lots, kind of like the free U2 album that they did a few years ago. Maybe there'll be people who say, well, I didn't want your free TV service.
Oh, it's like the story about how Serial became such a big hit as a podcast because it was the same. It was released like within a week of them disaggregating the podcast app from iTunes, and suddenly everyone's like, "Oh, there's this new app on my phone called Podcasts," and suddenly you had this whole millions of Apple users going, "Oh, what's a podcast?" It was a tab on iTunes I'd never clicked on before. So they can command enormous power there. But Olivia, to me, this is a bit of a tip of the hat for why Apple is even interested in a streaming service. It's all about bolstering their hardware business.
In some ways, you could say it's a very Apple approach to kind of just focus on this sort of exclusive, high production value content and not fill it up and try and be a sort of a catch-all service. So they're definitely serious about this. And I think this little trick of giving free access for a year, will they hook people? I don't know. I watched the trailer for The Morning Show. The other thing that I'm quite interested in is Oprah is back apparently on the new suite of programs with some sort of program that is there's not.
She's
much
bringing back the book club to Apple.
Yeah, and look, they've said as well that pretty much like each month there'll probably be 2 new shows. So it'll ramp up pretty quickly from that launch. And I mean, as much as, I was sort of joking about it earlier, that there is that element, right, where, HBO, there's plenty of people who only subscribe to it because Game of Thrones existed. There are plenty of reasons why people will say, you hear everyone talking about some cool new show, it'll give people that reason, well, I'll dive in for a month and just watch what I wanted to watch.
And just forget to cancel my subscription and, now I'm paying for it. It's only $5.
This is why I still have a Tidal subscription. I think all of these streaming services, they are sort of built off this idea of at least one attention-grabbing show a month will make you sort of justify the amount of money that you're paying for it. And look, most of these other services that we're now seeing launch, particularly in the US, are doing so in part because they're media companies launching them with massive back catalogue. Disney, of course, being the major one, but we're also seeing Warner Media launching HBO Max, which is going to have the entire back catalogue of Warner Brothers, Friends, and everything like that. Apple is probably quite unique in the sense that it doesn't have a back catalogue, but what it does have is actual money. So there's an advantage there, and what they wheel out at these events is just like famous face after famous face after famous face. You've got Steven Spielberg in there, J.J. Abrams. Is there a direct line that can be drawn between having a video streaming service and a wider business? Do we get a sense of how those things actually interact for a company like Apple?
Perhaps the most interesting outcome of this most recent event is a couple of things. The TV, and as you said, we're going to talk later about this game subscription, that is indicating a bit of a shift for Apple to a more services-based company. So for ages, it's all been about the Apple hardware. You drop a couple of $1,000 on a laptop or $1,000 on an iPhone, and, while they've sold more than 2.2 billion iOS devices since the launch of iPhone, iPhone sales are flagging, and And this is potentially the beginning of a bit of a sort of a pivot, if I might use that word.
They sell an Apple Music subscription already. A lot of people will pay for an iCloud subscription, which is the storage for all your photos and things in the cloud. They're talking about Arcade now. We're talking about Apple TV. There is absolutely that idea that every company really likes that idea of finding that way to just have that nice baseline of revenue that's always coming in. And in some ways, Apple's never going to be the kind of company that turns around and starts, selling the hardware at a loss just to keep you on their subscription service. But a lot of these subscription services, will be available, whether you use Apple hardware or not, particularly in the case of like Apple Music. So there's lots of these elements that it just seems like it's a bit of the future of Silicon Valley companies is finding these sorts of subscription options.
Yeah, and that baseline, for reference, I read somewhere that they are aiming to, by 2020, next year, have their services division reach $50 billion.
Is that all? All right, there is lots more of this in the podcast of Download the Show. We're also talking about whether or not the new iPhone's worth getting, and also Facebook have launched a dating service. I know. We're going to be discussing that. It's all in the podcast of Download the Show.